Good morning and welcome to Different Strokes virtual conference. My name's Lauren and I'm the marketing manager for Different Strokes, if I haven't met you before. And it's brilliant to welcome you here for what I know is going to be a wonderful session today. This session is part of a series of sessions that we'll be doing all week at 10 AM and 2 PM every day up until Friday. And I want to say a big thank you to our sponsors, Bolt Bird and Kemp, who've made this possible. Just to let you know, as you probably heard just then, this session is being recorded, but the good news is you won't be appearing on camera. It'll just be myself right now and our lovely guest speaker, Kath, shortly. I'd like to draw your attention to two functions. One I know lots of you are using well already. One is the chat function. So if you haven't used Zoom before, just scroll your mouse to the bottom of your screen and you'll see the chat icon. If you click on that, you can introduce yourselves or let us know your thoughts throughout the session. The second is the Q&A function. We will be running a Q&A at the end. Now, if you have any questions that come up during the session, then submit the question at the time that it comes up, because it can be sort of easy to forget what you want to ask at the end. So if you go again to the bottom of the screen, press Q&A, you can type your questions and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can at the end. Now, some of you have submitted some questions ahead of time, and I will be sort of asking Kath those at the end of her presentation as well. Now, that's probably quite enough for me. On to our speaker, Kath. Kath Wood works for Remploy, which is the UK's leading disability specialist. Their aim is to transform lives through sustainable employment. And I have to say, I've had a sneak peek at today's presentation, and I just know it's going to be so helpful for so many of you watching with us today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you on to the lovely Kath.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and I really appreciate the opportunity to deliver this session. I am going to be sharing some slides and I've got an awful lot of information to cover, but please don't worry, as Lauren said, the session's being recorded. I'm also going to supply a transcript of exactly what I've said so that you can go back through it at your leisure and make sure you pick up on all the important information that you need for your situation. Okay, so the session's called Reclaiming Your Career, Work After Stroke. I'll introduce myself. I'm Kath Wood. I'm a disability training and consultancy specialist now for health management, but previously for the first 13 or so years, I worked for Remploy. My whole team has moved across to Remploy. So whilst working for Remploy, I've been supporting disabled people into work, and I've moved on now to supporting employers and educating them about different disabilities. So during this session, I'm not going to be talking about the effects and symptoms of stroke, as you are all experts in that topic from your lived experience. Instead, I'm going to be taking the perspective of employment in relation to stroke. So the aim today is to help you to navigate a return to a meaningful career after a stroke, whatever your current situation. We'll begin by looking at returning to work, making that decision, talking to your employer, and finding a new job if you need to. Then we'll move on to consider the workplace adjustments which you may need in the workplace, helping you to see what options you and your employer have in finding a job which uses your skills, but also considers your needs. And of course, we're ending with the Q&A session. So as Lauren says, please type in any questions as you think of them, and I'll do my best to answer them at the end. So the decision to return to work is a very individual one, and it's certainly not straightforward. There are lots of factors to consider. You obviously need to seek medical advice from your doctor or consultant before you plan a return to work and consider what they have to say. However, some people report feeling pressured to go back and others report that they're feeling held back. So listen to the advice, but remember that you know your own capabilities better than most, if not anyone. In order to be ready for return, it's important that you make sure that you've had access to all of your necessary physiotherapy and occupational therapy support, and you may need to request this. Whilst it's important that you do gather the views of people around you and closest to you, especially those who've supported you in recovery, please bear in mind that some people can be overprotective or overcautious. It's important to remember that a return to work will also have a knock-on effect on the energy that you have and the effort that you put into home life as you adjust to that additional exertion. You may also be feeling the pressure to go back to work due to financial strain on the household. Please make sure you get some advice on the benefits you can claim and also to work out what difference a return to work will make on your finances, especially if it's a new job or you're going back on reduced hours. The most important element to consider is, are you ready? How do you feel both mentally and physically? Work can really boost your recovery, but it will be demanding too. Please don't forget to reach out to Different Strokes for advice. You can use the helpline or reach out through the Facebook group. It can be particularly helpful to hear advice from people who've been through something similar. So let's start by looking at what might be involved if you're returning to an existing job. Hopefully during your absence, you've been in regular contact with your employer, but this is not always the case. When you're ready to discuss returning to work, there should be a meeting to discuss it. This might be called a return to work interview. You are entitled to take somebody with you to this type of meeting, and this can help you to make sure that you don't miss any important information and help you to feel more confident in discussing things. Your employer may request that you see an occupational health service. This service will provide an independent assessment of your symptoms and how they might affect work, plus provide suggestions for adjustments. You could also choose to share other medical information with your employer, but it might be a more successful meeting if you focus on what you can do and the support and adjustments you need rather than just your symptoms. One of the most common concerns when you go back is, can you go back to your full hours and duties? You could ask to go back for a trial day so you can both see what the issues might be. A phased return is often suggested, as this lets you manage your energy levels during the transition back to work. This should be over at least a 4-week period, and it should be gradual, and make sure that you include regular weekly reviews. There may be a need for you to reduce your hours either for a temporary period or even permanently. Please make sure that you take time over this decision and make sure you consider if you can afford to have this reduction in income. If it becomes clear that you're unable to return to your previous role and all of the duties, then there may need to be a discussion about redeployment. Again, this is not a decision to be rushed, and there may need to be some negotiation, shadowing, or even a trial period involved before you make a final decision. So it is important to note here that you do have some legal protection. Under the Equality Act 2010, an employer must offer workplace adjustments to disabled employees. The term that's used in law is a reasonable adjustment, and what's classed as reasonable depends on the size of the business, the cost of the adjustments, what's already been tried, how effective the adjustment will be, how practical it is for the business to make that adjustment. Some employers are quite fearful of the term workplace adjustment, mainly because they don't know what can be done, and they also worry about the costs. We will see later on that these fears are often unfounded, but you may need to provide the information to your employer to help them to understand this better. So it may not always go 100% perfectly. So if you feel that you've not been treated fairly or you've not been offered the right adjustments, then you could seek advice from various different organisations, including the CAB, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the Equality Advisory Service, ACAS, Disability Rights UK, or if you're in a union, you could consult with your local rep. So in this section, I'm going to talk about finding a new job. Not everybody can or wants to return to their old job. So there's a few different ways that you can get support to find a new job. The first port of call should always be the job centre. You may already be signing on and receiving out of work benefits, but the work coaches at the job centre can also help you find work. Sometimes they can support you directly by giving you access to courses or job opportunities, but they can also refer you on to a variety of different employment programmes. The Work and Health Programme is the main programme nationally for disabled job seekers, and the provider should be fully equipped to support you to find a suitable job. They will also have employer partnerships which can help bypass some of the recruitment processes. Job Entry Targeted Support, or JETS, is a light touch employment programme that's recently been introduced for those that have been out of work and claiming either universal credit or new job seekers allowance for at least 13 weeks. And these are usually run by the work and health providers. The Restart Scheme, again, another new programme just recently started. This will give those who are claiming universal credit, who've been out of work for at least 12 months, that extra support to find jobs in their local area. IPES, or Intensive Personalised Employment Support, is a one-to-one support and training programme to help you into work if you have a disability or health condition. So now let's look about the other options that are across different regions of the country. In Wales, you have Work in Wales, which is a single point of contact through which you can access personalised expert advice and training to help you find and keep good long-term employment. The Employability Skills Programme has been created to support unemployed adults to improve their employability skills and help them to find work. React is a scheme for anyone who's facing redundancy and lives in Wales. It's a grant that funds qualifications and courses to help your personal development, allowing you to bring your skills up to date and add valuable qualifications to your CV. In Scotland, there's the Fair Start Scotland programme, which is very similar to Work and Health programme, but it's commissioned by the Scottish Government. There is also a programme called PACE, which is designed to support those at risk of redundancy or have been made redundant. Manchester and London also have devolved power for employment programmes, and they run programmes, one of which is called Working Well, which you can access if you live in the right areas. Often your local council will also have a supported employment service which you could access. The Lottery funds a programme called Building Better Opportunities, which can help people find employment or training. And these are often run by local housing associations or charities. And there are disability charities who also have their own employment support, including Scope, Leonard Cheshire, RNIB and RNID if you have a sensory loss. So now let's look at some advice for finding a job yourself. If you're going to need workplace adjustments, then you need to find a supportive employer. Disability Confident is a government scheme where employers agree to certain commitments and actions. Those at level 1 committed have made a commitment. Those at level 2 employer have carried out a self-assessment and can evidence that they've taken action. And level 3 leaders have been validated and are encouraging others to be part of the scheme. You can find a list of Disability Confident employers online. Just do a Google search. And if you download the list in Excel, you can add your own filters to find employers in your own local area. There are some job search sites which advertise vacancies where employers are specifically targeting disabled job seekers. Examples include Even Break, Disabled Works Employment, Disability Job and Equal Approach. And on the RIDI site, you can find over 100 recruitment organisations which are actively promoting the employment of disabled people. So once you have found a supportive employer and a suitable opportunity to apply for, you'll be making the application. And one of the biggest concerns that people have is disclosure. So when and if and how to tell the employer that you have a disability and about that disability. A lot of people worry about being treated differently, being excluded, being discriminated against, and sometimes people feel they're not ready to talk about it to a stranger or feel it's not part of anybody else's business. But by disclosing, you can make sure that you get the support through the recruitment process. It may help the employer understand why you move, walk or talk in different ways and stops them making the wrong assumption about your ability. If they know in advance, your employer can make sure adjustments are in place when you start work, so you can be successful right from the start. If you make the decision to disclose, you're in control of what you say, when you say it, and how you say it. And you won't have that fear that people will find out about it later on. If you don't disclose at all, then you do risk taking on a job that you will struggle in, as you will have no support. You may end up being asked to do tasks which affect your health, or risk an accident or mistake happening. If people don't know about your symptoms, you may be perceived as lazy or incompetent if you're struggling. You're not required by law to disclose, but I hope you can see there are many advantages to be open from the start. So now let's think about when and how to disclose. If you disclose at the application stage, you can request adjustments to the recruitment process which you might need. At this stage, application forms may ask if you have a disability and if you need adjustments, but they should not be asking about any details about your disability. And I would be wary of sharing too much detail, as it can be misinterpreted if it's just given in writing without an opportunity for you to explain. If you disclose at interview, it does give you a chance to explain more and answer any questions. However, again, any detailed questions about health and disability should be reserved for after a job offer has been made. Also, discussing it in an interview can distract from your skills and abilities and tempt you to go into too much detail too soon. After a job offer, an employer can ask about your health and disability, but your answer should not be used to exclude you from the job. I would recommend being open and honest on any pre-start questionnaire and cooperating fully with any occupational health assessments, as this ensures that you and your health can be supported properly. Finally, I would definitely suggest chatting to your manager about your needs, as sometimes the information from your application form or even the occupational health report does not get through to them. Again, be open, but focus on coping strategies and adjustments and how having these in place can make sure you can produce your best work. So when you're ready to disclose, plan what to say, and if possible, practice it with somebody else. Make it positive about your strengths and skills and what you've learned from facing this situation. Highlight how your experiences have strengthened your skills and experience. Explain where and how you might need supporting. Try and avoid giving a list of symptoms, but be prepared to suggest reasonable adjustments in the workplace. Emphasize coping strategies, use positive language and talk about what you can do, and outline how you can undertake the essential role requirements. Of course, self-employment can be an option too. It can offer a lot of flexibility. You're in control of when you work, so you can work more when you feel well and take rest when you don't. You can work part-time and choose to work from home if that helps with managing the effects of your stroke. But there will be upfront costs. You will have to keep business records and pay your own tax. And you'll need to work out if you'll be able to earn enough to survive. On the slide, you can see a short self-employment checklist of other things to consider. If you're not quite ready for a return to paid work, you could consider volunteering. It's a great way of testing out your strengths, stamina, and skills under a lot less pressure. You can see how work might affect your health, see how you might balance work and home demands, and also judge how it will affect your fatigue levels. It can also be used to test and refresh your skills or learn new skills, which is great if you find yourself needing to switch careers. It can also get you out and about and meeting new people and does not affect your benefits. You can find out about volunteering at your local volunteer service or at the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, the NCVO, doit.org, which is a search facility for local opportunity, Volunteering Matters, or Reach Volunteering. So during this next section, we're going to look at some suggested workplace adjustments that you might need. So I thought it would be worth at this point having a quick reminder of the wide-ranging potential effects of stroke. These graphics I've taken from My Broken Brain, Reclaiming Your Life, which is available on the Different Strokes website. There are physical effects such as energy levels, mobility and dexterity, the varied psychological effects, plus the knock-on social and workplace effects. It's important that when you return to work, that you're able to carry out a fulfilling and meaningful role. I hope that by being more aware of the adjustments that can be made, you can educate, advocate, and negotiate better, and therefore counteract some of the social and workplace effects that we can see here. On returning to work, there is some key information that may help to pass on. People may not know anything about a stroke, but they will certainly not know about your experience of a stroke. So it would be really good for you to tell people about it. Potentially, human resources and your manager might need to know some of the following information. How are you affected? What you find difficult? What triggers your symptoms or makes them worse? Any treatment you're receiving? The management or coping strategies you use? Any recommendations from medical professionals who are supporting you? And any previous workplace adjustments that you might have used before. Now, thinking about what you share with colleagues, it will depend on your relationships with them and if you feel you will need their support as how much you want them to know. We're now going to look at some workplace adjustments which might help for certain sets of symptoms. Obviously, everybody will be different, so this is about picking and choosing the ones you think will be most effective for you and negotiating that with an employer. We're going to start with pain and fatigue. So flexible working is usually available in most businesses, and it can be a very effective way of managing both pain and fatigue. You may experience more symptoms in the morning, for example, so a later start might help. Or if your symptoms fluctuate, you could work more when you're feeling well. Taking regular breaks can help with pacing yourself. This might mean splitting up your lunch hour into shorter slots or starting early and finishing later to allow more breaks. And if you have a supportive employer, they may be happy for you to take a break as and when needed without such a formal arrangement. Many organisations have absent trigger points, but these could be adjusted when the absences are disability related. Sometimes they can be extended, or only non-disability related absence is counted. Time off for medical appointments should be offered, but you may be asked to have these at the start or end of the day to minimise disruption. Working from home can reduce the time and stress of travelling and also help with you to manage environmental factors. But please be aware of the risk of feeling isolated, which is not great for your mental well-being. If you can, arrange for reduced changes of location or to reduce travelling, as that can be really helpful too. The location of your workstation can be helpful, perhaps closest to the entrance, staff room or toilets, to reduce the distance that you may need to walk. Now we'll consider mobility and dexterity. All employees working at a computer should have a DSE assessment regularly. This is particularly important if you're returning to work or changing location. Having the correct posture is vital, plus it will identify if you need additional equipment such as an ergonomic chair, adjustable desk or a vertical mouse, for example. Where possible, items which you use frequently should be stored nearby. Items used together should be stored together, and storage of items should not involve you having to bend or twist. There may be a need for a risk assessment for your return if your job contains physical duties or the use of equipment. This is not designed to exclude you from doing those tasks, but to ensure that they can be done safely. Lifting and carrying tasks may need to be removed or adapted. Make sure that you do any manual handling and health and safety training and follow all the guidance they give. Equipment such as trolleys may be helpful. Repetitive physical movements can cause an issue, so there should be opportunities for a variety of tasks or task rotation. And of course, we should be aware of trip hazards all of the time, but colleagues may need to be extra vigilant if you're struggling a little bit with how you're moving. Next, we'll look at cognitive issues, including organisation, processing, and memory. These can be particularly frustrating changes that we experience, but there are some simple strategies that can be used to help. Starting with organisationally, think about using a diary, planner, alarms, alerts, checklists to help you keep track of everything. Use a filing system or colour coding to get yourself more organised. Break down any tasks into smaller steps. Focus on specific single tasks or one task at a time. See if you can have planning and organising time at the start and end of every shift. You may need to make colleagues aware that some tasks are taking extra time. You might need to get help with prioritising tasks and setting deadlines. It's important to think about minimising unnecessary changes, particularly of task or location, and think about what support you might need during any change of system or process, changing roles, changing teams, changing managers, or even moving location. And when there's meetings or training, having aims set out in advance or at the start of that meeting can really help your brain to get organised. For processing and memory, taking regular or additional breaks can really help. You might want to have training in shorter sessions or have some support with training. Again, getting material in advance of training and meetings can really help you to digest that information and process it before you join it. Perhaps you could have a one-to-one meeting after a training session or meeting with your manager or a workplace buddy, just to make sure that you've understood what's gone on and you've got the key points. Access to a quiet private space is helpful for you to digest information and focus. Minimising sources of distraction, interruptions where possible. Some people use noise cancelling headphones, for example. Or I have known people use a do not disturb sign when they're working on something really important. If you're not sure that you're fully picking up on everything verbally, making sure that you ask colleagues to check your understanding of key points. Examples and templates, recaps and summaries are really helpful for prompting. You might choose to do some note-taking or mind mapping to help your concentration. Getting information in bite-sized chunks helps you take that in. Written backup of any verbal instructions. So if somebody leaves you a voicemail, make sure they send you a text. That would be a good example. And just thinking about the extra time that you might need to process questions and give answers, certainly in conversation and in meetings, just allowing that extra time can be really important. So now let's think about reading, writing, and speaking language, if you like. So if you have any identified issues with reading or writing, there are some simple changes that could be made. Information giving in multiple ways, so written and verbally. Making sure key points are highlighted or you get summaries. being allowed plenty of time to read and complete a task which involves information, having opportunity to go through written material before and after any meetings or training, not being asked or pressured to read out loud or write in front of other people. Again, time to process before answering. So certainly you might want to talk to colleagues about how to respond if you're struggling to find the correct words. Do they help you? Do they don't help you? How long do they wait before they intervene? Think about double checking and proofreading support if you need it. Could you use a dictaphone or record certain information on your mobile phone? Think about dictionaries, spell checkers and glossaries just to help that understanding. And of course, we have a range of different assistive technology available, such as speech-to-text software. So if you do have some visual issues or reading issues, then you could actually ask for some of this stuff to be, so these points to be applied to written material. Actually, this would actually benefit everybody reading that material as well. So coloured or off-white paper to avoid that glare. Dark coloured on a light text on a light background is better. Red and green text is quite difficult for a lot of people. Think about the type of font you use. So plain, evenly spaced, rounded font, at least size 12 to 14. When you're highlighting or emphasising something, use bold rather than capitals, underline and italics, because visually that's more difficult to read. Having your text left justified and full width and a good line spacing distance, maybe 1.5 even. Bullet points and numbering help rather than continuous paragraphs of text. Keeping the sentences short and simple, concise and direct. Having clear instructions, list of do's and don'ts. Using any kind of graphics like flow charts, pictograms, even photographs. And making sure that any technical language, jargon is avoided or explained, and try not to use any abbreviations, again, explaining what they are if they're used. So it is inevitable there'll be some dip in confidence if you're returning to a different role or you can't go back to doing all of your previous duties straight away. So some additional support with kind of confidence and mental health is really important to consider too. So you might need some support to prepare for reviews and appraisals, maybe feeling particularly nervous about having those type of formal meetings. You might want to have a meeting before any group activity to discuss kind of what's going to happen and what support you might need. Having a conversation with your manager about how criticism affects you and how there's a real benefit to having positive feedback and praise. You might appreciate smaller achievable goals to help you build confidence. You could have the support of a workplace mentor or buddy who's just there to answer the questions and give you that little bit of support when you need it. And it is important that you consider what you want colleagues to know and if you think it would benefit them if they had some workplace awareness training. It can be beneficial to consider how you manage your stress levels. So asking for some advance notice of any changes that are going to happen. Support to plan and prioritise your workload. Better sort of sympathetic management of any targets or deadlines. And thinking about whether relaxation, mindfulness or meditation will help. There are some different strategies called worry management, which would be worth looking into. And there's a variety of different negative thinking strategies that you could apply to help you feel more positive about things. And have a look at the 5 ways to wellbeing. You can Google that, but a lot of NHS trusts have a lot of information about the 5 ways to wellbeing, which are just things that you can do to boost your wellbeing and keep you going. It's really important to think about maintaining your mental wellbeing on a regular basis and not take it for granted, because sometimes physical changes we can almost expect to happen, but we perhaps don't anticipate the mental changes that we might experience when we're going back to work. So I'm going to quickly cover some of the other less common symptoms, but it is important to consider them, I do believe, because there's a variety of symptoms that people are experiencing. If you've developed seizures or epilepsy, then it's important to think about if you need to talk about reduced travel to other locations, thinking about the chairs that you use with armrests and no casters. Does there need to be soft flooring, rubberized matting, maybe if you normally work on a hard surface? Do corners of doors, desks, cupboards be rounded or have rubber edging added to them? For seizures as well, it's particularly to think about what arrangements do you need for lone working, what are the safety kind of risk assessment that you might need to do for that. If some people are photosensitive, so thinking about fluorescent lighting and flicker-free lighting, just making sure the lighting's suitable and having an anti-glare guard on your computer. And actually, it is worth sitting down and having a seizure plan for what to do if you do have a seizure, so everybody around you is able to support properly, and think about risk assessments, particularly if you're using equipment. If your vision has been affected, lighting is really important. So you might need a brighter light or your own lamp. Sort of having colour contrast of the door frame, skirting boards and flooring of different levels can help you navigate the building. How the building is laid out really helps as well. So wider routeways, good signposting, and maybe more set locations for things. So the meeting always happens in the same room, or you work in similar locations. Think about ergonomics too. So this means having all of the items you need stored in an easy access location. Large print might be required. And again, assistive technology such as text-to-speak software can help you to take notes, create documents. And sometimes if your sight loss is significant, you may want to consider some guiding training for colleagues. So if that you are needed to be guided around a building, that you do have that, that your colleagues have more advanced knowledge of that. Communication is obviously one of the key factors if you have any hearing loss. So written backup of verbal information is really important. Again, lighting is really helpful. Good lighting is helpful if you lip read. And also important to think about positioning. You don't want the other person to be sat too far away or silhouetted against any source of light like a window or a lamp. Interpreters may be needed for important meetings. Even simple things about making your colleagues aware of how to approach you without making you jump. And there are loads of different equipment that can help, such as a hearing loop, a listening device, or even a pager to alert you if there's a fire alarm. So a lot of workplace adjustments to consider, and you won't need all of them. You'll need a select few that match with what your situation is. It'll depend on your needs. It'll depend on the job that you do. So it is important that you do kind of have all of this information, but actually assess it with through your own lens so that you know what you actually need. If you do need any workplace adjustments, and particularly if there's a cost or some equipment is involved, then it's important to consider if you need to apply for access to work, which is the government programme which helps with funding of workplace adjustments. So a lot of the adjustments that we've talked through, the Access to Work grant can fund, and you can see a variety of different things. The other thing we didn't mention is travel to work. So that hasn't come up so far, but actually Access to Work can help you with costs of travelling to work if you're not able to use public transport. Really important if you are going into a new job, particularly, if you apply for Access to Work funding in the first 6 weeks of your job, all of your adjustments that have been approved by Access to Work will be fully funded. So your employer will not have to pay any cost of that. So that's why it's so important, again, to make sure that disclosure is done early on. You've had a discussion with your manager and you make your application in that first 6 weeks. After that fact, after the 6 weeks or in an existing job that you are in, that your employer the funding will help your employer depending on the size of your employer. So small companies will have no threshold. Medium-sized companies have a threshold of £500 and large companies have a threshold of £1,000. So the employer will contribute 100% of the costs up to the threshold level and 20% of the costs between the threshold and £10,000. And Access to Work will cover the 80% between the threshold and £10,000 and everything above £10,000, up to a current annual limit of £62,900. That changes every year. So all of this information is taken directly from the government website. I would highly recommend going on there. There's a guide for employers, which you can download and give to your employer. There's also a guide for you as the individual making the application. So you make the application rather than the employer. So you can apply online or by phone. And this on the side, you can see some of the basic information that they want you to be able to provide during that application. Sometimes you will require a full assessment. Sometimes they will ask you to get 3 quotes for the equipment or the service that you need. But the sooner you start the process, the sooner that can be put into place, because obviously some of those assessments and processes do take some time. So the sooner you make the application, the better for everybody concerned. Alongside the sort of physical workplace adjustments, Access to Work also funds the mental health support service. And this is run by 2 companies, one of which is Remploy, and I've done a bit of work on this contract. So this is fully funded, so there is no cost sharing involved. So it's totally free to the employer and to the individual. The individual can self-refer, and you don't have to have disclosed to your employer that you're having any difficulties with your mental health. It's all about support to manage your mental well-being in relation to work. You don't have to have a defined condition diagnosed, and it's really about making sure that if work is impacting your mental health and mental health is impacting your work, you can get support from this programme. You get 9 months support from a vocational rehabilitation consultant, and there's a focus on self-help strategies, workplace adjustments, and signposting for further support. So I'll make sure that we also share the leaflets and posters for that service with you as well. And that's the end of the formal presentation. I can see we've had lots of messages and chats and lots of questions. So I'm going to come off share and hopefully we can answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kath. And I think I reflect everyone who's here today just to say how brilliant and helpful that presentation is. So thank you. In the chats, I thought this was a good sort of comment in the chat where someone said, I felt ready to return to work, but then found the commute exhausted me. Make sure you are really ready to return. And I think that's something we see quite often, is that rush or feeling that pressure to get back. And then once you're in work, that can feel a bit like a trap once you've committed. So I think I agree with that. Take it slow and take all the advice you can get from Kath.
It's important that you can test out some of those things. So, you know, doing that commute before you even decide to go back to work, you know, do that commute 3 days in a row and see how it impacts you. You know, it's, you know, testing those little things out can make all the difference because they can really trip you up. You might be fine doing the task of the job, but the traveling to the job may be the thing that's just too much at this particular point. So yeah, good point. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll move on to some of the questions we had beforehand. I think some of your presentation probably have answered some of these, but we'll try and whiz through them. The first is, how do you approach fatigue with a prospective employer?
So this is a really interesting one, and I suppose it relates mostly back to the conversation we had around disclosure, choosing how to explain it and when to explain it. I guess because it fluctuates and because the term fatigue is perhaps not that well known by employers, there may be a misconception that you're going to be tired all the time and you're going to need reduced hours for every single day. So I guess it's just trying to build together some information that you feel is relevant for that employer to know. So how does fatigue affect you? How likely is it to happen? What do you need to prevent it from happening? What are the simple adjustments that you will need to be able to maintain that high level of performance in your job? So making sure that you go with solutions rather than problems. I think I would advise that the way to approach that conversation.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question is quite specific. It says, could there be a chance I can restart my nursing degree even now as a stroke survivor?
This was a really interesting one. It took me time to sort of think about how I could answer this one. So there's two parts to a nursing degree, as far as I can understand. There's the practical placement side and there's the studying element. And I certainly wouldn't be able to advise on the studying element. And I would certainly seek some advice from whoever's running the courses, do a bit of investigating around what's involved in the studying. From the work placement side of things, I think it's, again, thinking about some of the key tips around testing out some of your stamina skills in maybe a less pressured environment first. So volunteering could be an option, or maybe looking at some part-time work in a similar setting to test out to see whether you're able to maintain the level of performance that might be needed in that job. It's, you know, we know it's going to be demanding, doesn't mean it's not possible, but I think just to maybe test it out a little bit more before you commit to that full degree. That would be my advice.
Brilliant advice. And there's sort of a comment that's been submitted that says the NHS guarantees interviews to disabled people if you meet the essential criteria. So that's just one, if people don't know, that the NHS, I think, recruitment process is very inclusive.
Yeah, and as will all the disability confident employers and leaders, you should expect that same provision to be part of what they offer. And that's one of the criteria of disability confident as well. So it replaced the 2-tick scheme that people might have been aware of. So disability confident is the equivalent of that.
Fantastic. On to the next one, which is, how is one to come across as mild aphasic with job interviews? So this person struggles with communication and speech, when you know full well you can do the job easily and have the realms of experience for it.
So that comes back to disclosure again. It's funny how it sometimes comes back to that kind of how do you explain it? How do you approach that conversation? For me, if you are worried that it will give a misconception of how able you are by the way that you are interviewing, then it would be an advantage to have a conversation before the interview to explain that sometimes this happens and what to do if it does happen, but actually it shouldn't affect your ability to do the job. So I would set the scene with the employer prior to the interview, in case that under that pressure situation of interview, you do have more struggles with the words, which obviously we know that under stress, most of us are going to struggle with words anyway. So it'd be really useful just to set that scene with the employer in advance if you feel comfortable to do that. That way people aren't going to have the wrong impression of your ability during the interview process.
Absolutely, and it's so tough, isn't it, in a stressful hour if your symptoms are exacerbated by stress to kind of present your best self. So that's fantastic advice. The next question is, where do I start in finding something to do in terms of work or a career that I will enjoy and that will make a difference?
Okay, lots of advice here. So for me, volunteering is a fantastic way of doing something you love and seeing how that practically works out for you. So that could be a chance to try before you buy in a lot of different careers. I would highly recommend an employment program, because that's another route into finding opportunities that perhaps you wouldn't have found being readily advertised. So some employment programs have relationships with employers where they have opportunities they bring straight to the employment program rather than advertise. So it could be of use to explore your skills with an advisor who's experienced in employability to be able to see where else you might be suited. The National Career Service have a skills health check, which you could go on and work out kind of where your skills lie, what job areas, and they have job profiles which you can explore to look at what's involved in different jobs. So I guess I would say start with a skills health check, look at the different jobs that are around, then think about maybe trying it through volunteering or getting on an employment program so you get that expert help. That would be my advice.
Fantastic advice as always. Another person's asked a very similar question to that, so I think that one's covered. This person asks, how will I know when I'm ready to return to work?
I think that, as I said at the start, that is $1 million question, and it's something that only you can really answer. You know, you can take medical advice, you can make sure you've got all your occupational therapy and physiotherapy in place. You can sort of feel as well as you can and feel quite stable in the way that your health is at the moment. And that might be one side of it. Psychologically, again, it's thinking about, are you confident? How are you feeling mentally ready for that extra challenge? And I would say testing it out. So do some things which are similar to the tasks that you would do at work. So if you have a commute, do the commute. If you have to do some research on a topic of your choosing. If you have to deal with customers, do some volunteering in a charity shop. Do something which is as similar to the demands of your job as possible to test it out if you're not sure. Take advice from the people around you, talk to your employer, talk to your friends and family, but ultimately you have to go on your gut instinct as well. And it won't always be 100% right. So that's why I say test out and try out as much as you can before you make that big commitment. Certainly going into a new job is a big commitment. So just maybe testing that out before you do that.
Absolutely. And another sort of comment from someone saying, while I was still in hospital, I was convinced that I would be fine to go back to work, but it wasn't until I was home that I realised the true impact of my stroke. Just be careful about setting expectations with yourself and others. So I think that's a really good point sort of from people who've been there before. One of the questions I'd like to ask you is, this person is not classed disabled officially, according to PIP. Does that impact their return to work?
Okay, so the legal definition under the Equality Act and what classifies through PIP could be two different things. So the legal definition of disability under the Equality Act is a mental or physical impairment which has a long-term, substantial adverse effect on your ability to do normal day-to-day activities. So what that classifies is very different from what would go through a formal benefits assessment. So whilst the Equality Act there is to protect you and to give you legal rights, it should not be the only reason why people put adjustments into place for you. So employers should have an understanding that by putting adjustments into place, they enable you to work to your full potential. So adjustments are there to help you to be good, useful at work, which is to your benefit and to theirs. Sometimes employers are not on board with that, and that's where the legal definition comes in and where the legal protection is in place. And that's where I said you need to seek that separate advice on those from those organisations I talked about. We hope that people see the bigger picture, that it's of benefit to put these adjustments into place. A lot of them are very simple, a lot of them are free or very low cost, and if there is a cost, there's access to work. So I think the conversations with employers need to be around those kind of issues before we get to the point where the legal protection kicks in, but it is there for a reason. So the PIP assessment and the legal definition of disability are different. So, you know, I would suggest thinking about whether you meet the legal criteria, and if legally you need to challenge, because you may not need to do that if you have a really good conversation. One of the key things I am going to defend employers here, because sometimes they just don't know. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to approach it. They don't know about access to work. So sometimes we have to educate and negotiate before we kind of, you know, go down the route of looking for legal protection. So I would really encourage you to try and inform your employer, help them to see what simple changes could be put into place before worrying about the legal protection side.
Absolutely. Can Remploy services be accessed throughout the UK?
Oh, that is $1 million question as well. So we have across Maximus UK is the overarching company that Remploy is part of, and across the two companies we run a huge number of different employment programs. There is no one size fits all program that is run nationally anymore. Work Choice used to be that no longer exists. So in each region there will be different providers. So again, I would go to your job centre and ask what provision is available locally. Remploy may well be the option in a lot of places. We do run quite a range of contracts. We've got quite a lot of contracts in Wales. We run Fair Start Scotland. We do some Working Well in London and Manchester. We've got Restart across most parts of the country as well. So depending on what programme you need, Remploy may be the right provider. I'd like to say we're the best provider, but obviously I'll be biased. But actually, most importantly, is that you talk to your work coach at the job centre about what's available locally and choose the best contract for you, even if that's not run by Remploy, because it's important that you get the right level of support under the contract.
Fantastic. I'm going to move on. We've got 3 more questions, and I think we might have to call it a day there. But if you have sent a question that we've not had a chance to answer, Kath, are you happy for me to ask people to email us info@differentstrokes.co.uk, and then we can try and pass those on to Kath, if that's okay with you.
We can create an FAQ document. Maybe that would be good to send out alongside everything else. That
would be brilliant. And lots of people have asked, you know, for instance, this question is a speech and language therapist said it would be brilliant to be able to have your presentation. It would be helpful for me to recap the last bit of info on funds that are available to support clients and employers. So I think lots of people find, you know, this is the first time they're getting this information from.
Yeah, what I would also do is we can download the fact sheets on access to work for both employer and individual, and perhaps send that out as well.
That would be brilliant.
They're really available, but it'd be really helpful just to have everything all in one place around work. One email.
Brilliant. So fantastic. So next week, once the conference is over, we'll start to look at that, and we will email everyone who's attended today. Just last 2 questions. These are slightly different, which I think is good. One is someone who's 10 years post-stroke and they want to take on further responsibility at the organisation they're with at the moment. What can I tell my employers that I can bring to the role?
It's really interesting, because part of the work I do around the topic of disability confidence is around progression and barriers to progression. And I think it's a really interesting topic that probably needs more time than we can give it now. From my point of view, it's the same as anybody else selling your skills. We should always go in about what you have got to offer, what are your strengths, what are your skills. Now you might have additional strengths and skills because of the coping strategies and the management techniques you've had to put into place over the last 10 years. So actually using some of that, those qualities that you've gained can be a real helpful, particularly if you're moving into management, because if you have an understanding of differing needs, I think that makes you a better manager. So it's about actually translating some of those things that have happened to you over the 10 years into benefits to the next step of your career. Again, same with any conversation, that disclosure, the discussion of management techniques, coping strategies, workplace adjustments can be happen the same as any other new job. But I would say actually thinking about what different qualities you've gained through your experience of the last 10 years can add even more to what you have from your previous career. So it is about selling yourself as a whole package, but it's about you first, and kind of that the disability is just part of that. It's not everything. So, you know, thinking about how you explain that is a really important, and practice how you're going to explain and answer any questions that people may have about limitations, for example.
That's brilliant. And then last question, can you suggest resources or routes for information support for self-employed limited directors or one-man bands or one-person bands? Yeah, so for self-employed people, what would be the best place to get support? Can they, for instance, get support through Access to Work if you're self-employed?
Yeah, so Access to Work also applies to self-employment. It's not an area of my expertise, but if we put it on the FAQs, I will find out as much as I can about it. Again, local job centre would be one of the first port of call as well, for you just to kind of ask what grants and funding may be available for setting up as self-employed, because certainly at this particular point, there will be potentially lots of funding around for that kind of stuff, as there is for employment programmes, because obviously the government is trying to respond to unemployment following the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think now would be a good opportunity to find out about funding, but I will investigate, and if there's any links I can share, we'll put it in the FAQs.
Fantastic. And then someone's just mentioned they're from a different organisation who'd like to get in touch with you. So if you drop us an email, info@differentstrokes.co.uk, we'll forward that on to Kath so you can connect together. I just want to say, Kath, I can't thank you enough for today. I think it's such a brilliant presentation, so well delivered. And I think, you know, often people are left adrift to not really have these conversations so thoroughly in person. So thank you so much for that. Is there any parting words for you?
No, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity, and it's been really interesting to do that research and to expand my knowledge around stroke and employment, because I, probably like 99% of the population, had a preconception about stroke being for older people. So actually working with you guys has opened my eyes to kind of how my organisation and how my training may needs to reflect stroke as one of the disabilities that we talk about. So thank you for spurring me on to kind of look at this topic in a different way. So it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm more than happy to work with you to kind of share the resources and do the FAQs, because I think this is such an important topic, and I know people are probably going to come off the call and think about 101 things they should have asked. So let's do that FAQs as well, so we can really get that full package of information for everybody. But it's been a pleasure, and thank you everybody who's come along and spent the hour with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think it will be great to keep working alongside Remploy. I think what you guys do is fantastic. Now, just let you all know, there are some resources on our website at the moment. They're not perfect, but there are some employer resources that you can give to your employee to explain stroke. We would like to, in time, do some more work on those. So do check those out on the website. That concludes this morning's session. I'm sure we'd all want to stay here for hours and pick your brain there, Kath. But we are just halfway through now, a week of our conference. So there's 5 more wonderful sessions for you all to join in with. We hope it's helping to empower you to reclaim your life after stroke, which is our aim. And I want to thank once again our sponsors, Bolt, Bird and Kemp, and most importantly, Kath and Remploy, for everything they've done today. Wishing you all a wonderful rest of day and week, and we'll see you very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.